Councilmember Clark,
Here.
Councilmember Ottenberg,
Here.
Councilmember Marshall, Chair Galani,
Here.
Councilmember Rambo,
Here.
Councilmember Dodwell,
Here.
Councilmember Flasher, Councilmember Bartoni,
Here.
and we have a quorum.
Excellent. All right. Well, that brings us to the first item on the agenda after roll call, which is approval of the minutes from the meeting that took place on Tuesday, June 20th, 2023. Anyone would like to make a motion to approve those minutes? Councilmember Ottenberg?
Yes, sir.
We have a second? Councilmember Clark? All right. A voice vote. All in favor of the motion, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? And any abstentions?
I'll abstain.
Okay, great. That brings us to public participant. Nope. Councilmember Bartoni?
Yeah, I'm abstaining from the minutes, Mike.
Okay, one abstention, Councilmember Bartoni. Okay, that brings us to the next item of the agenda, which is public participation. Do we have anybody present for public participation? You want to do it now, Joe? Okay. You want to do it as public participation or having moved the agenda item up? Okay, sure.
Thank you very much. My name is Paul Keppel, and I live over on Hart Road. The item tonight that I want to speak to is this Gateway Off-Road Cyclists sign request in Bluffview Park. And with Gateway Off-Road Cyclists, we've been working now since about 2008, designing, building, maintaining trails in Bluffview Park, as well as over on Rock Hollow with the zombie trails as well. And we build and maintain parks all over the county and including St. Charles County. We spend a lot of time out there actually working in the park. And so we interact with a lot of people as we're out there. And one of the things, we listen to people and they keep asking us questions about the trail system. How do we move around this trail and what's here and what's available to me and what's the history of this place? Right. So we kind of came to the idea that one thing that's lacking in here that we'd really like to see is what we're calling a trailhead information monument. And Joe, maybe you have an image of it later that you can show. We came to a design that we created, and what we're actually using is a couple of posts that were taken down by St. Louis County when they originally started working in this park. And so we'd like to reuse a couple of these concrete posts that are laying aside right now, and then use that to create this information monument. We think it really has three components to this that would be in there. One is a map, if you will, an overview that would show Bluffview Park, the trails that are available there, what's available over on Rock Hollow, the interconnection with the Al Foster Trail to Glencoe as well as Castlewood. So sort of the big picture for everybody and what's available to them. The second piece would be information about the bike specific trails that are right there at Bluffview Park. And then the third piece, we'd like to see some of the history brought forward about this park. Person who donated all the land to this and the history of it and a little more history about it. So this is a concept that we've come up with and we've brought it to Mr. Bunich, and we've asked several of the council members at the grand opening of the park recently. We spoke about it and they said, hey, let's kind of get it in before I decide in front of this forum, but we can start bringing it in front of other persons. That's kind of why we're here tonight. We're going to kind of bring this forward and hope that the city can take on this project and install this, build it here. And we're here to answer any questions. We'd be happy to do.
Thank you very much. Okay, any other public participation? Anybody on the online? No. Okay, well, that brings us to our action items, which would bring us to planning matters, but in the interest of the gentlemen that are present and the Gateway Off-Road Cyclist sign request. We're looking at, would anybody be opposed to moving that item on the agenda up to the first one so that we could address it and they don't have to wait? So can I get a motion for that? Okay, Councilmember Dodwell, seconded by Councilmember Rambo. All in favor of the motion, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? And any abstentions? Very well. Thank you very much. Go ahead, Mr. Vunich.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. First of all, thank you all for being here tonight. We do appreciate it. Can't do our business without you, so thanks again. And again, thank you for moving this particular item up on the agenda. We have a number of items to cover tonight, so I'm sure the two representatives of Gateway Off-Road Cyclists appreciate it as well. Tonight, the department has prepared for your consideration regarding this particular item, a memorandum. The memorandum starts out with a bit of background about Bluffview Park. It does have an interesting history. Originally, John Packwood owned the property, and Mr. Packwood was an industrialist from St. Louis, and like many, they used to take the train out along the Merrimack River here to recreate and get away from the summer heat from the city. Mr. Packwood ultimately passed and the property changed hands and ultimately ended up with St. Louis County. St. Louis County land banked the property for a number of years. And during that process, people would get onto the property, damage what was there in terms of the house and any of the other structures. And ultimately, St. Louis County demoed the house and some of the other structures and kind of let things just sit. After a successful partnership on the Rock Hollow Trail, St. Louis County did approach the city and ask if we'd be interested in taking on Bluffview Park. Certainly through the efforts of this committee, different individuals, but maybe some of you, and the city council, agreement was reached and a lease was signed. Ultimately, the park opened in August of 2015, just shy of our 20th anniversary as a city. It has become a major activity center. The initial phase, as many of the committee members will recall, was pretty much just to get our foot in the door. We created the access off of Old State Road, the long access roadway to the area where we had parking, and then did the best we could to create a trail from that parking area down to Al Foster Memorial Trail, and then do some improvements in the bluff area to make it as safe as possible, but not many. Thereafter, Gateway Off-Road Cyclists came to the city and asked if they could do a partnership with Wildwood and actually develop some specific trails that would engage the mountain bike community and all ages of the mountain bike community, whether it's young children. And yeah, I think you've seen some of those out there, as well as that core group of recreationalists that do mountain biking, as well as some of the older folks too. And so the first phase, I think whetted everybody's thirst for more. And with the support of City Council, phase 2 was just recently completed. And it was mentioned we had the ribbon cutting and grand opening. It was at that time there was discussion about just signage. And there is signage. We have an entry sign out near Old State Road on the retaining wall system. And it's a very nice sign, but it just gives the name of the park and the partners that were involved in the development of the park. And then at the parking lot area, we have more regulatory signs. We don't have a lot of information. And part of it is just the clutter of signs, but also just the cost associated with it. As Mr. Keppel mentioned, the idea of this particular sign was brought to the attention of the department on one of our visits after one of the major trail components had been completed by the organization. And certainly it's a wonderful sign. The columns, those historic columns, those are the match or mates to the ones that are at the entry into the trail system at the parking lot area. So there's that consistency and recovering historical artifacts, so to speak, off the property itself. And then the Bluffview Trail system, this is a pretty standard sign. I think it kind of mirrors what Great Rivers Greenway might do or something similar. And I did encourage, and Gateway Off-Road Cyclists did contact Great Rivers Greenway to see if they would assist in funding, either partially or in total, and they declined. And so I think the organization has gone through pretty much every box and checked it to see if there was something out there that might work. So tonight, the organization and the department have prepared for you a consideration to investigate this sign, to basically see if it's viable in terms of the location, the construction details, and then bid it to see what the costs might be. Obviously, you're not obligated as the committee to recommend, nor is city council obligated to approve. But I would like to think that we as the committee could move forward and at least investigate what the components of the sign would be, actually develop a set of drawings for it, bid that, and then come back with the bids. And then from the department's perspective, look at funding through our fiscal year 2024 budget process. At this time, the department does not have the funds, nor does it feel it can kind of allocate or shift funds at this stage, particularly given what I'll explain to you tonight regarding our maintenance costs. But I think it's an opportune time. The budget schedule's out. We'll be talking about this starting in September, so not that far off, more than about 6 weeks or so. And then if we get the bids, we can certainly then lock in that bid that is reasonable if you, as the committee, are agreeable, and then hopefully proceed with something in 2024. So at this stage, the department is asking for authorization from the committee to take those next logical steps, to develop a set of plan sheets for bidding purposes along with specifications, and then actually try to bid it so we have a good number for the process that we go through with our fiscal year budget for capital improvements. So those two steps would be appreciated. Thank you.
And Director Benish, real quick on that, is there any cost or impact to do that? Are you requesting?
Mr. Adams, one of the gentlemen in attendance, is very versed at making very nice plan sets and diagrams. I'm counting on him to be able to help the department in that regard. And if there is just a need to do a little extra, I probably would lean on Ken Keitel with TerraSpec, who's done both phases. And so there may be a slight cost, but I would say it would be somewhere around $500 to $750. I would just probably have Mr. Keitel have his engineer just look to make sure that all the structural components, the piers, everything works. Something like that.
Thank you very much. Would anybody like to make a motion?
I'll make a motion, but I have a question.
Okay, let's get a second on the motion. We'll come back to your question. Second by Councilman Rambo, motion by Councilman Dodwell. Okay, your question?
My question is, Joe, have we talked about any participation from the residents who use or non-residents who use the trail? Any kind of fundraising that we might do to help offset portions of the cost of this monument at all?
Well, I haven't discussed this in great deal to deal with the leadership of Gateway Off-Road Cyclists, but I'm thinking the bid may actually just be for the sign piece, and that Gateway Off-Road Cyclists would use their volunteer system to basically install. And
Okay.
And I think they're well equipped to do that. They've done all the honeysuckle eradication prior to the trails, and then they've built all the trails, which include many of the larger boulders that created the hub, which is described in the report. So I'm thinking what we may end up paying for is just the sign component itself. The columns are there. They've been kind of discarded by the county, and we could retrieve those and go from there.
Well, I just think if we could do something collaboratively, our residents may feel more likely to approve of us spending portions of our funds to help support this, but they'd want some engagement from the individuals that use that facility for what it is, as far as the off-road cycling. But I'd also like to help promote the fact that just that walk down the hill on the new trail, hard surface trail that we put in, and sitting on those benches down at the end. If you're a resident of Wildwood, you should go do that. You're missing something if you don't.
It is probably one of the most special places along the Merrimack
Mhm.
River because it's publicly accessible and not much of that is anymore.
I took my 2 7-year-old grandkids down there with my husband a couple of weeks ago, and I've never seen them sit so still and so amazed in my life. So, yes, it's
Is there
a
handcuffs
special
there?
sight. Pardon me?
Are there handcuffs there?
No, there were not. There were not. No.
Councilmember Randall?
Yeah, this is a great partnership and Gork does great work and I'm proud to support this. Honestly, I do agree with Katie. We're going to have to be more creative in future years to figure out how to fund some of these great ideas. So we can explore that a little bit later on, but I would, definitely everybody keep that in the back of their mind. Gork has also offered to help further with the clearing near the area where the sign is going to be. And that will be dramatic because instead of being enclosed by invasive vegetation, we'll be able to see down the hill some and whatnot. So it's just that park is getting better and better. And I'm tickled to death to support it. I do have a question for you that you can't answer. You've done a lot of signage. Is this $10 or $10,000 or somewhere beyond or somewhere in between? Do you have, just a roughest of guesses that no one would hold you to?
The estimate I got from Mr. Keppel was that $15,000 number, and I asked him to be conservative.
Yeah.
My guess is that with the columns in place, the work that the organization's done previously, I think it's probably somewhere in that $500 to $7,500 range.
And that is restoring the columns or the signposts so they're weather resistant again, because they're probably kind of ratty from being out exposed.
We did very little to the columns that we set at the entry.
Okay.
Surprisingly, they were in much better shape than we expected. Gershenson Construction, which did the work on phase 1, they actually thought they were just going to pitch them. It's like, oh, I think we've got something there. So we kind of held them back, and it ended up working out. These are all great questions, and you're right, I really can't answer it, but I can tell you that signs are more expensive than you think. But if we can create that partnership with the organization, the off-road cyclists, and have them do much of the, let's say, sweat equity, I think we'd be only paying for the sign and maybe some cement and things like that, just materials.
Awesome. Thank you. Councilmember Marshall?
Yeah, my question would be, I'm sure that you'll get to this point. It just looks like a county sign to me. I would think that as we go forward with this, it should be a little bit more like a Wildwood sign. And unless the county wants to pay for it, but I just think that it looks as if it's not something that Wildwood would have done exactly that same way. So I think it's a great idea. I think it should be in the budget next year, but I just think that probably needs some work.
We could certainly do that. And as you know, we created a kind of a new sign image for John L. McCabe Memorial Trailhead. And everybody seemed to like that as we presented it through the process. So maybe we can emulate that a little bit more. And that was done by the designer.
Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you. I got Councilwoman Clark and then Councilwoman Rodenberg.
Yeah, thank you for saying that about the John L. Cave Park, because I was going to mention that sign really gives the ambiance of the city. But also, while we're thinking about this, and yeah, we don't have monies right now, but maybe start thinking about in the future adding trail signage, small, not something that takes your look away from the nature, but something in the trailheads, all of the trailhead.
Well, if we're successful as a committee and department helping the committee, once we insert any cost for a sign, it comes a line item, and I still have line items in there from 10 years ago that I often wonder why we can't get rid of them, but they seem to stick. So hopefully we may start something new.
Councilman Rottenberg?
Question I have, and this is probably an incidental item on the proposed sign itself. Will there be something on there that indicates that Bluffview Park is in the city of Wildwood or part of the city of Wildwood Parks system? And the reason I ask that is regarding the La Cave trailhead. That's a great trailhead. But what I have run into different times when I'm out on my bike, if I stop at that trailhead, I'll hear people talking about what a nice job Chesterfield has done installing that trailhead.
We need to correct that. And yes, I think I can assure you, we'll make it perfectly clear that this particular park is in the city of Wildwood. Good point. Thank you.
Thank you.
Silence disappeared.
Yeah. Have a dark sign that just says entering. Okay, so we've got no other hands from Bertoni. No, okay. Maybe we'll do a council member or mayoral dunk tank at Celebrate Wildwood to generate funds for these types of things. Dude. Or an auction. Have a council member come do yard work here.
Yeah.
All right, well, it sounds like a great idea to me too. I think it's awesome and the sign looks really good. And I agree with the idea to perhaps wildwood it up a little bit. But outside of that, great. So we've got the motion followed by the second and the discussion. Any other discussion on the motion? Looks good. All in favor of the motion, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? And any abstentions? All right. Motion carries. Thank you very much, gentlemen, for coming out.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank
And
you.
that brings us to our original action items, starting with planning matters. Items ready for consideration and new business. We have 3 items. And the first one is the watershed projects and associated recommendations from the task force affecting wards 2 and 5. Director Vudich.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Chair and members of the committee, kind of as a footnote, the Watershed Erosion Task Force held its 35th meeting last week. If you equate that to about once a month, we've been at it for almost 3 years. At this particular meeting, the department presented to the task force members a recommendation related to 2 projects. At the time the memorandum was prepared for the task force, there was still the thought that we were getting $500,000 from the state of Missouri to assist in our watershed erosion task force in identifying repairs to priority locations. As you're all aware from Mr. Lee's email, that money was cut in the 11th hour from the state's budget for the upcoming fiscal year or the current fiscal year. However, as the committee members may recall, at the time the budget was approved for fiscal year 2023 for the city of Wildwood, we had submitted 5 grant applications for federal monies to support our priority locations that had been identified. Each of those grant applications had a matching component that the city would be responsible for if the grants were awarded. That amount was $750,000 collectively for the 5 grants. Unfortunately, none of the grants were awarded to the city, so the $750,000 is part of the capital improvements program for 2023. We have been using those funds to basically cover costs relating to engineering for our priority locations. The city council's approved this pre-submittal of permit applications through the Corps of Engineers. They've also supported additional work in the retrofits of the basins in the upper reaches of Cox Creek. So we have been slowly but surely using some of those funds to inch our way toward solutions for these priority locations that are identified at the bottom of page 1 of the memorandum. However, as we've worked on the retrofits of the basins, we know that that process is going to take some time. But there are a couple of locations that have been identified, these priority locations that are in the opinion of our consultant team and the task force, in immediate need of some immediate need to be addressed. And so at that meeting last week, the task force recommended that the tributary by Evergreen Forest Court and the Cox Creek meander by the Highlands at Wild Horse be two projects that we would proceed forward in 2023 and 2024. In the memorandum, the task force and the department identify, for the most part, why these two projects rose to the level of support. First and foremost, the top priority project, which is the Triple Meander, and you can't do the Triple Meander without including the detention basin by the Elegant Child facility, is over $3+ million. And that's probably not a good estimate based upon what's happened over the last couple of years. And I failed to mention at the task force, but we have a requirement in our charter, and for the most part says if a project exceeds a certain level, and I believe $3.5 million, that has to go to the voters. So that project is just going to be kind of a bit cumbersome to kind of work through, but certainly deserving of attention. But we have two immediate needs, and those two immediate needs I've identified. And both of them are on the critical list of priority locations. We've submitted the permit applications to the federal agency. The projects do protect occupied properties or city infrastructure, and the list just goes on. The task force agreed that we don't have the funds right now. We're about $300,000 shy of the funds to complete the projects, but that we could begin the actual engineering and creation of the bid specifications, so that as we go through our budget process for 2024, we would have all the steps in place to fund these projects fully at that time. And so tonight, the department is presenting the two projects and seeking from the committee a favorable recommendation to proceed forward with the detailed engineering and development of bid specifications to allow the bidding to be done as part of our upcoming budget cycle through the fall of this year. And ultimately, if the bidding is favorable, that we may be able to fund the actual repairs for 2024. And with Ms. Ripeto's help, I just want to show you a few photographs that we've taken. This is the area at the Highlands, and as you can see, it's a meandering course, and immediately downstream is our newest bridge, the Strecker Road Bridge, that crosses over Cox Creek. And this is, like our, as noted in the list, one of our top 5 priority locations. And this is the area of common ground. It doesn't look too bad, but that white area up there shows the extent of flooding that occurs due to some kind of disturbance that I believe MSD is responsible for. And that's rock from the creek that's deposited all the way up there on that common ground area. And then the Evergreen Forest Court. This is, sorry, thank you. Didn't realize we had the more pictures. This is the MSD main sewer trunk line project. And as you can see, they rocked in the bank. The rocks have been removed and the manholes now exposed. This is the Evergreen Forest Court. 2 homes that are perched at the very top of the drainage tributary. And the drainage tributary is undercutting the area by them. This is probably another just view looking toward the west. The first is looking toward the east. And I believe you can see that the retaining wall supporting the backyard area of this particular property is collapsing. And there is cracking of the patio area underneath the deck due to the shift in the ground. So those images were part of what the task force has been viewing at here at these 2 locations and elsewhere across the city. And so the conclusion of the discussion was we have 3 projects that are being offered. Eventually, the detention retention basin retrofits, we're not close yet to that. We still have a lot of engineering to do. And then obviously these two priority locations. All of it's expensive, but certainly at this stage, we feel that we're in a position to at least proceed forward and get some better numbers and see if there's anything we can do in 2024 to address these two locations and eventually basin rest. But again, tonight, in summary, we'd like authorization to proceed forward with the detailed engineering and bid specifications for these two projects. Thank you.
Director Vunich, real quick, I have a question. The additional $360,110 that's needed for those projects. Do you have an anticipation of where that's going to come from out of the budget?
We intend to encumber some of the $450,000 we have in place still this year. We won't spend all of that, and we'll encumber whatever's left over. I hope that to be at least $250,000. The intent here is to actually shift from parks as much as we can. And some of that money that was allocated for some of the other projects in future years, directing it toward these. And that's consistent with the strategic plan that basically talked about now developing new park trail components at this time and enhancing existing parks. And that's kind of what we've been doing over the last couple of years. Bluffview Park is an example of that. And so from that perspective, a little sacrifice on the park and trail side to get something moving with some of our more critical watershed erosion problems, I think is reasonable at this stage for the city.
Okay. Any questions? Councilmember Marshall?
Yeah. I happen to have a little bit of knowledge on the Ward 2 business over there. What about the Corps of Engineers? They did a lot of that damage. I mean, they used to have a bulldozer in there every week, tearing stuff up or moving stuff around. I actually thought those rocks were moved up away from the manhole, not by MSD, but by the Corps of Engineers. Are they weighing in on any of this, or are they just kind of setting back, waiting to see if we can get money?
Well, we've engaged them for the permitting process. As part of that, we'll have some conversations as we go through those permit applications. And certainly, we have a member, Richard Sturman, on our erosion task force, who is retired and very eager. And he's going to basically start that whole process over again of calling every federal, state agency and seek monies. And so he's been very thorough and very detailed about it. But we'll engage them. But I'm afraid, as we've heard from others, is everybody wants to permit our project, but nobody wants to help fund them.
I just think that's kind of been normal for what they were doing in order to do that. So, but thank you.
Councilmember Dowdell?
Couple of questions. I see on the list the Cox Creek triple meander and how expensive that is. Are we going to go out for federal or state funding again, starting or for whatever's available in 2024, even though the governor may have let it go this year? I know sometimes they do say things like, well, you got to try 3 times before you get anything.
Yes, Mr. Lee can probably talk to that better than I, but in conversations with him, I believe Mr. Silverman is going to be at a future city council meeting to kind of discuss what happened. And certainly it's our intent to put the full court press on again in 2024. We still hear rumors of that federal infrastructure money that was one of the first actions of President Biden and Congress. And we're kind of trying to track that now as well, and see if there's any availability of funds there.
Okay. And then one other question. Has the task force provided those homeowners where we saw photos of things starting to fall off into the creek, ways and methods for them to mitigate the activities that are going on? I mean, I go up and down Cox Creek between Strucker and whatever road that is, and Chesterfield over by Linda Vista. Or it's not Linda Vista anymore, but you know what I'm talking about. Don't see how long we've both been here.
We're showing our age.
Yeah, yeah, we're showing our age. But I would think that because of the homes being placed the way they have been with absolutely no trees, no shrubbery, no anything to stop the water from running off of their property into the creek, that's a lot of what's causing problems all along that watershed. And do we have any way we can enforce as a city those homeowners to start, hey, go out to the Arbor Society and start buying seedlings or something, or invest in this so that you can make sure you don't have this problem. I mean, I guess I'm a little reticent because before we became a city, somebody strafed a hill off of Strecker and it all went into my backyard. And
Sorry.
no, that wasn't your fault.
That's
But
the count.
in order
You
to
should see what
mitigate that, we planted 10 pine trees, 4 magnolia trees, all sorts of stuff. So we created our own woods behind our house to mitigate that mud coming down the hill. So I think I guess from my perspective, I think we need to educate the homeowners, but also make them a little bit responsible for their particular property to ensure that the water running off of their property is not exacerbating the problem.
So 3 components as a response to your statement and question. We have a couple of publications that were done fairly early on by the task force that kind of explain the nature of the problem and some simple solutions. We followed that up with some do's and don'ts, and the do's, exactly what you just described. If you're downstream of something that's creating a water problem, the best approach is to basically do some plantings of types of vegetation that like wet feet, so to speak. So we have those 2 publications. After our meeting last week, Ms. Holthouse, who's one of the co-chairs, and Ms. Donaldson, who is on the task force and has some background in graphics, advertising, communication, they're going to do something for the upcoming Celebrate Wildwood event. The task force is going to have a booth there,
Okay.
and they're going to have something that actually specifies what are the best plantings for our soils and the situation we have. So that's kind of the first component. During Arbor Day, I believe it was an idea of Ms. Ripito and Ms. Nager, our superintendent of parks. We got the saplings from MDC, Missouri Department of Conservation. We did a kind of a promotion, and we had a lot of people show up and pick them up. And we handed out some information about the type of plant, the type of sapling we were getting, and the best locations for them. And then thirdly, it is the intent of the task force to focus on education. I believe once we get the projects kicked off, our residents as the primary focus for future meetings in 2024, as well as I think the beginning of 2025. They've made it clear, if we're going to solve this problem, we need everybody's help.
Okay. I just wanted to make sure that
No,
we were
that's a very
headed
good
that
point.
direction.
Yeah.
Councilmember Bartoni?
Thank you, Chair. I'm going to start by making a motion to move forward with the department's, I guess, request to move forward with this. And then I have a comment and a question after. If I get a
Okay,
second.
Councilmember Bartoni's made a motion to move this forward. Second, Councilmember Dodwell. Okay, back to your question, Councilmember Bartoni.
Okay, and thank you. And I mean, I'm glad that the task force has made this recommendation to this committee. I'm glad this committee is moving forward. I mean, even if we can't fix everything that we would like to fix, I think we need to fix as much as we possibly can, because none of these are going to get cheaper as they go down the road. And they're, even the ones that are $500,000 now might be $3 million in a couple short years. So I appreciate everybody's support with that. That being said, so for Mr. Vunich. So of the money that you're, like the engineering plans, so to speak, that you're wanting to move forward with this year, which you're saying we probably have enough money for that. Is there anything else that we would be able to get done if we had more money this year? So like just for these two projects, if we had another $300,000 this year, would we be able to move forward and get more done? Or is there just not enough time and we're going into 2024 either way?
Mr. Bartoni, I believe we're moving into 2024. I know it sounds kind of silly at times, but we're at the end of July almost. We've got 5 months left in the year. Once we do the bid, developing the engineered plans, the bid specifications, if we're lucky, we'll take 60 days or 2 months. You have to give 15 to 30 days for the bidding process, and then it comes to committee, and it goes to council. And before you know it, we're in 2024. So I appreciate the enthusiasm. I'd love to get a third project on that list, and that's Community Park by the pavilion there, which has some unexpected erosion. But I think we've addressed some things upstream from there, just in terms of clearing out the creek to address some obstructions and things like that. But at the best, I would tell you that even if everything fell into place, we wouldn't be ready before 2024.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so Councilmember Rottenberg.
That right after the governor's veto, there was some talk of possibly a session of the legislature to override his veto. Do we have any updates on whether or not something like that is actually going to take place?
I would probably have to defer to Mr. Lee. He keeps a little bit more tab on those things.
Okay.
City
Yep.
Administrator Lee.
Yeah, so I've been in touch with our legislative consultant, Mr. Silverman, and unfortunately at this time, we are thinking that the legislative session to override the vetoes from the governor is not going to occur. That being said, there are some efforts being undertaken right now currently, and two of those, one being we are going to go ahead and move forward next year and try to get the same funding, hopefully a little bit more we can maybe hustle out for the next year. And with the support we've seen from the legislature, it seems like we can get there. That being said, right now we are working on getting the governor's team to come out and visit Cox Creek and visit some of the other sites. And then also we are reaching out to the multiple gubernatorial campaigns that are currently going on, because at this time next year, we'll be heading into a different fiscal year with a different governor at helm after the November elections. Those items are all coming together. And another thing is Mr. Silverman will be visiting for city council in August. So that will be a good time to ask questions and also keep driving home the point. I do think that there is ample opportunity for funding at the state level. And it is a tragedy that unfortunately we were not able to get that state funding. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Councilmember Clark.
I have a question about the property boundaries. If, you showed the pictures of the houses there and their property has actually dropped off into the creek bed. But that, I guess it would be longitude, latitude lines that would still determine where their property ends. So if that's the case, how do we work on those stabilization of those embankments if now we're working in their properties?
Well, if Ms. Ripito could go back to share screen, and your point's well taken. It's like anything that has a water feature by it. That property boundary that corresponds to that water feature, that can change. We see that out at the Merrimack River. I couldn't tell you those lots that abut the river where their rear property line is most days. But yeah, if you could go to the aerial. And so for the most part, what I've tried to depict here is all of the work would be contained in common ground. And so from the perspective of the department, we would be working with the homeowners associations and not individual property owners. And to give credit where credit is due, St. Louis County at least had the foresight not to put the creeks on private property per se, but to use the common ground to basically contain them. And so we've met with the Evergreen Homeowners Association early on, Mr. Holthouse, Mr. Farmer and I, and they've agreed that if we can get the funds, they're more than willing to grant access. And the same is, I believe, held true for the Highlands at Wild Horse. We had several members of their community come to the meeting on Wednesday and speak.
One follow-up, if I may, Chair.
Sure.
I look at those pictures that you have and walking the creek bed, I see the same thing. How confident are we that their homes are not going to slide down the hill, I guess? Because if their patios are cracking and things are shifting, you watch YouTube videos of homes sliding down hills. That have they done any assessment of that, or have we? I'm just concerned about them.
Obviously, the departments of public work and planning are as concerned. We've had originally Dr. Hammer out at that location in Evergreen Forest Court. We've had Todd Wilson. We've had Joe Wilson, Todd Wagner. We've also had MSD out there as well, along with the Corps of Engineers. We've tried to emphasize to them the urgency of some of these situations, and that, and I say this with no ill will toward other communities, but we've done a lot of the homework already. It's not that we need to step back and say, is this really a problem? We have all this information, we have all this data. Just no one's stepped forward yet to kind of assist us. They're all willing to permit the work once we fund it, but no one's really, as I've mentioned before, not to sound like a broken record, nobody wants to fund it. Can I answer you? Do we have something that's going to happen tomorrow or a year from now? I don't know. I believe that was the urgency on the part of the task force. We need to do something.
Councilmember Altenberg and then Councilmember Marshall.
The two homes that we saw in the picture, I'm curious as to how their backyards lie. Do they slope downward or are they more horizontal in nature? And the reason I asked that question is I went out and visited a home in Ward 3 last week where the property owner feels that his backyard is eroding away because of a creek down at the end of his backyard, which slopes downward. And when you go out and look at it, you see that although the backyard slopes downward, it then levels out for a period of for some distance before it reaches the creek. Mm-hmm. And the erosion that's taking place in his backyard is more due to water just draining down that hill from his gutters, and then also possibly from the water that comes down the street, comes around the cul-de-sac, and as it's coming around the cul-de-sac and the gutters, and it comes by the driveway where the curb is a little lower, the water runs down his driveway and then along the side of the house and then down across the backyard. So I was just curious as to how the backyards lay for these two properties.
The two properties from the site visit that I participated in, as soon as you step off the patio areas, which are underneath the decks, you're on a slope.
Okay.
And it, for the most part, the slope steepens as you take a step or two. And then for the most part, it's a difficult descent down to there. In fact, oftentimes when we visit the location, we come off of the nearby roadway at the bridge and walk up to it. That's why you see the photos as you do here, more so than any others.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Councilmember Marshall.
I was at the homeowners meeting, and I believe that the two owners have already talked to their insurance companies, and their insurance companies will not touch anything till the problem is solved. So they're homeowners because the decks are hanging and the concrete's hanging there. So they're kind of in that place where they don't have a whole lot of options either, because until something's solved, the insurance company is not going to come in and offer to rebuild or do anything else either. So, and that, it is kind of interesting there that MSD is involved, because that actual outflow from the sewer lines is actually eroding out that hillside. It's one of those things where it should never have been that way, but that's so much of the problems that we have all over the city. But in their particular cases, I don't think they even use their decks because they're afraid, and their insurance companies have told them, we're not going to do anything until something has been addressed on the other ends of it. So, for what it's worth.
Yeah, and I had one question too, related to like those properties like that are backing up that have issues, or like in those neighborhoods, similarly to what we talked about with like Lake Chesterfield and the lake over there. What is the appetite, or has there been any conversation amongst those HOAs for some type of assessment or neighborhood participation and funding something like that? Just because, to your point, it's one of these things where it's heartbreaking to see that happening, and you want to help folks, but at the same time, it's also one of these things where do you draw the line as to what's the city's responsibility in to have two homes here that are in great jeopardy, clearly, but what everybody, all the other residents of the city to spend $500,000 to fix that, or what? So I'm just wondering, and then we talk about Lake Chesterfield and the fact that it's their issue, that we're willing to help assist in some capacity potentially, but what is that appetite, or is there?
Generally speaking, there's not much of an appetite per se. They're localized problems to a certain degree. We may have more success in a discussion with the Highlands at Wild Horse, just because it's common ground area that's being impacted more. And just to the south of that area where the photographs showed the manhole, the rock being displaced, is their swimming pool and tennis court. So it's not to say that there might not be a participation. The approach I think the Watershed Erosion Task Force wants to take is, let's see if we can fix the immediacy of the problem. But as part of that, there's got to be a landscaping ground cover kind of program, something that's going to follow to stabilize, because we can fix it, but if we don't stabilize it and put some roots down, so to speak, it's just going to kind of reappear at some point.
My concern was just that all this, obviously it's localized problems in a lot of areas.
Right.
And we're talking about tens of millions of dollars in overall cost and problematic situations. So as is typical, I think in most situations, once the city starts paying to fix things, now everyone's hands are off, because now it's a city problem. And well, how did you go and fix these guys' backyards, and you're not going to come fix mine? So it's almost like we open the floodgates to say, once we start spending these monies, that now it's our responsibility across the board to take care of everybody. Where does it stop, is I guess my question.
And I guess what I would say is the Watershed Erosion Task Force recognized that there isn't, that Wildwood isn't the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow. And that's why we spend so much time with consultants identifying those true problems. We have a list of over 90 locations that have been identified by our residents as problems due to a creek, a drainage way, flooding, et cetera. And that's the list we've worked from to whittle it down to these locations. And we did that through science, investigation by engineers, geomorphologists, hydrologists. So I guess what I would say is there may be a lot of issues and problems, but we've only are going to tackle those to date that have reached that level where our experts are telling us you need to do something. And that would be the response to individual property owners. We know you have a problem. And as Ms. Dowell mentioned, we have some solutions. You may lose some additional private property, but we know how to stabilize your area. Put some trees down, put some vegetation down. So, but in these instances, we know we have problems, and there are problems not all of the making of the homeowners association or individual property owners, Mr. Marshall mentioned. MSD put in this outfall structure and pointed it toward the bank. And guess what? It's when it rains hard, it shoots the water right onto the bank and begins the erosion problem each time there's a storm.
That's what we're seeing all the way up and down Fox Creek is what started as a meander out through those huge concrete
Yep.
pipes is now 10 feet above the bed, 10 to 15 feet above the bed of the creek. And it just shoots water straight across to the other wall and it bounces back. And
So, Mr. Chair, I'm not trying to minimize the problems of other residents. I'm just saying we've taken a methodical approach to identifying those areas where we think city funds would be best utilized to achieve the greatest good.
Yeah, no, and the last thing I'll say on that, and then Councilman Rambo next, is that just, and not to sound callous or anything, because it's obviously if we're having the engineers and the experts say something needs to be done, I guess no one's arguing that. We know something needs to be done, but who is responsible to get that done, I guess is a question I'm asking. And it's one of those things where that's a question that needs to be posed, because of course this is an all encompassing issue that, so obviously we prioritize areas based on what's the worst and then go after that. But once again, where's that gray area end where it's something has to be done or there's going to be a major problem, but is it really the city's responsibility to attack that versus if everyone else is saying, well, permit it, but we're not going to fund it, are we what forces us to take that responsibility if everyone else says no?
None. And again, I think the Watershed Erosion Task Force and at least the Departments of Public Works and Planning, we started with the federal government. We went to the state government. We want to go to those entities that have the funds and have claimed that they want to find solutions to these types of problems through the infrastructure bill and et cetera. But we've kind of run up against to a dead end, and we know we've got these problems. We'd like to see if we can solve them. You know, as we go through this process, if the motion's approved and city council concurs, and we begin the engineering and bid specification, and the bids come back and they're just too large, then the decision will probably be made for you. We just can't afford what we want to do, and then we're going to have to, as Mr. Lee said, go back to the legislature, go back to our U.S. senators, our House of Representatives, and say, listen, there's real problems here and nobody's listening. We need your help.
Okay, Councilmember Rambo.
Yeah, I started out with the first meetings of the Watershed Erosion Task Force, and I made exactly the same points that everyone down at that end was making. The MSD direction of the pipes, the homeowners association responsibility, the developer built the darn homes there in inappropriate places. Everybody has some responsibility, and I personally want to help everybody. My heart goes out to these people who are losing their backyards, but I felt we didn't do a good job on that committee in establishing the criteria. We should go for the greatest good. So I believe I completely support your line of questioning, Mr. Chair. We haven't done a good job here in this particular instance. I don't think we're doing the greatest good for the greatest number of folks unless the situation has changed since I was participating in that committee, because there are a couple folks that are set to lose their homes. My heart bleeds for them, but it's just like a tornado or some other natural disaster. I don't think fixing two people's homes is going to move the ball forward in a meaningful way in terms of helping the other 5,000 homes that are at risk in Wildwood. So I think it's incumbent on us to ask the same question at council if we're approving $200,000-$300,000 of expenditures to fix someone's backyard. It pains me to say that, and I don't want to sound any more callous than you did.
Yeah.
But there's a blowout on Fox Creek. There's a blowout on Fox Creek that is massive at the lower end of Fox Creek before it goes into Eureka. We're not going to, that's number 89 on the list of 90 because there's only a handful of homes, but those people deserve action as well. this is a difficult answer. We're not gonna get to it here, but I just wanted to bring it back up to say that I feel like we have the cart before the horse. We got the engineering, but we still don't know what criteria the engineers were using to say this needs to be fixed. Were they using the criteria of these people's deck are gonna go away? I've got problems of my own, but I solve them myself. And so it behooves us to keep that in mind. So now I have a question for Mr. Vunich that should be easy. I hate the idea of robbing the parks budget to do these projects. The sales tax is structured thusly, and we're going to get a stormwater and parks budget maybe someday that will people will think, hey, we voted for parks, but we're using it all to fix backyards. And I don't think it's appropriate. So my baseline question is, why isn't this a public works issue where public works decides we fix this street or we fix this backyard, and it's apart from parks? Is it just as simple as that sales tax concatenation, or is there something else afoot here?
Ultimately, I think as part of the fiscal year 2024 discussion, that needs to be, that particular item needs to be discussed. Can we defer some slab replacement? Can we defer some asphalt resurfacing of rural roadways for a couple of years to tackle the projects that the Watershed Erosion Task Force is recommending? And so I can only speak for the component of the budget that Melanie and I address on a day-to-day basis. And I think at this stage, at least from our conversations, we need to step forward and do something to address some of these problems. And we have focused on Cox Creek. There's now 8 other watersheds we need to investigate more as we go forward in the future years. But I will say that there is a long-term component to this, and that's the retrofits of the basins. Remember, the basins were built in the late 70s, early 80s. The standards were deplorable. They really don't do much of a function. Compounding that now, they're not maintained regularly by the HOAs. And so their volume has been decreased. And so the idea there is let's fix them. And we're going to get cooperation from the HOAs. We've gotten it already to the point where we've been allowed to basically do the investigations, fix those, have them actually built to a better standard, hold the water longer upstream, and alleviate the pressure downstream. So we are looking at a long-term component. But yes, we do have projects that are more immediate and localized, and I appreciate that. But I think the task force and the departments are at a point where we don't know where else to turn but the city.
Councilmember Dodwell.
Thank you.
So do you find that there would be benefit as a means to publicize this process that we've been going through to take on these 2 projects that you're talking about as a means to better teach our residents what needs to happen in order to save this watershed all the way throughout the city? Would we be using these activities as the city is taking a first step, but we need the HOAs and the residents to follow suit and take their own similar steps in this process so that all of us together can fix this? Because I don't think this is something the city alone can fix. The HOAs have to be involved with it. The individual residents have to be involved with it. And I think the city's done a good job of the due diligence of knocking on every single door we could find, wherever we could find it, for the past 3 years. But I think now we need to get out in the public. Or am I wrong?
Absolutely not. We've done some creek stabilization projects, but they have always been in conjunction with bridge projects.
Mhm.
And there's always been justification because the bridge was at risk, and obviously we needed to address that for the safety of the
Mhm.
users of the road. We've never ventured outside, let's say, that right-of-way component. And so I'd like to think that if we do a couple of projects, one like at Highlands and one here, very localized at Evergreen Forest Court, that becomes the template. We find all of the, oh, we should have did this, not that. We needed this from them, but we didn't get that. And so maybe it becomes, our trial and error that gets us to the point where in the future, we give a list of things they have to do, and these are the things we do. And we don't do those, we do those, that kind of thing. But I guess I'm just saying we keep talking about the issues, but we haven't necessarily stepped forward to figure out, okay, can we really do something to make it better? And I think the task force in making its recommendation said, yes, this may be the first step in figuring it out.
I just want to make sure that in that process that we increase our communication to the community as a whole as to the cost that the city has taken from all taxpayers for rectifying this situation for the few, that this is what we expect going forward from the homeowners association and from residents. And I think the task forces, at least in the meetings that I've listened in on, they know what they want to tell everybody. They just haven't told anybody in this yet. And so I think that needs to be also a priority through this process in order to ensure that we educate our community.
But I'm confident that once we get through the internet and trash issues, that our city administrator, Mr. Lee, who has that communication background, we can tackle some of these other issues that need communication and education out in the community better. And Mr. Lee seems to have a good handle on how those communication tools can work.
That was one comment real quick regarding similar to what you just said, Councilor Dodwell, but in going forward with this, to Councilor Rambo's point, if we just start doing things, we don't really have the criteria of how we're making those decisions outside of what these experts are saying are problematic areas, and then how many homes are being addressed at what point, and then how much money is allocated, and you're kind of like opening that floodgate without the parameters in place. Perhaps, what similar to what Councilor Dowdell was saying is if we come up, and maybe the task force can do this, is come up with somewhat of a strategic plan in the sense that when we go to St. Louis County to apply for a grant for some specific, repair or something, we have to provide all kinds of criteria of what we're doing to mitigate that issue in order to, and what problem that the grant would solve, from a safety concern or whatever it is that we're applying for. And then even if we get chosen and approved for that grant, the county will put in X percent and the city's responsible for the other percent. So perhaps on that line, we open it up to some type of, from a city, the city will provide a grant to assist in this specific area if it's in common ground, and the HOA can file an application to the city where they will have to meet certain criteria of the landscaping that's going to be done and what other mitigation efforts are going to be done that can be done on the homeowner side or the HOA side, and then if we approve it and it's 300,000, let's say the city's going to pay 200,000, but they have to come up with the other 100,000 in order to get the work done. So people have skin in the game, and there's a little incentive to actually take those other steps to do their due diligence and provide those efforts so that everyone's kind of working together. Versus, I feel like when the city or any government entity starts to take on that responsibility, it becomes, hey, well, now it's their problem. So you fix their area, you got to fix my area. And now this is $20 million. It's the city's problem to figure out how they're going to fix every area. And where do we stop?
Well, certainly, I think there's been a lot of those steps along the process that got the task force to last Wednesday's meeting. I probably should apologize. Maybe those steps aren't clearly defined for you all, and certainly we could delay any action on the motion tonight, and I could probably provide you that template or checklist, so to speak, of, and for the most part, a cost benefit analysis. If we do this, we get that, and so forth. Or hopefully, maybe I could have it for the meeting, the
For
city
council.
council meeting, if the motion were to proceed, to give you some assurance that, you know, it wasn't just a plea from a property owner or a set of trustees, we need your help. It was done more methodically with some of that logic that Ms. Clark always talks to us about, in terms of just, you know, there is a process and there are these checks and balances and things like that.
Yeah, if we could get that for council, and move forward with that tonight. Councilmember Clark?
Again, Mr. Bunich, I appreciate what you just said, because I'm thinking back to when I was on the Watershed Erosion Task Force for a short time, but I met with Dr. Hammer and Carol Holthouse. We met a number of times and came up with the criteria, and one of the was the number of the widespread area that we could take care of at one time, and critical areas. There were so many criteria that we came up with, and put them into a matrix, a decision matrix, so that we could come up with a good quantifiable way of determining which one to go with. And we did that. And so I'm sure they went and did a lot more than I did with that plan, and the steps that you were talking about, just following the Watershed Erosion Task Force. It has gone through a lot of the things that we are talking about now. So that maybe if we don't know all of that, then of course the rest of the, you know, the residents don't know it either. So that communication, I think I'm fine with going ahead with the motion now, but to supply that, maybe a list of just the steps that were involved, the milestones or the steps, and even a list of the criteria would help to understand it better and eliminate some of the confusion.
Councilmember Godwin, and then Councilmember Rambo.
We need to educate our residents. And I know that the Watershed Task Force has put together several different documents. Doing so, I have shared, because I went, I can't even remember where it was. It was down in Springfield, Missouri. They have a Watershed Task Force in Springfield, Missouri. And I was at one of their community events, and I stood and talked with an individual that's similar to you and a couple of their individuals that were assigned from the community as a whole. And I think I've even shared with you specific documents on here's what they've put together to share with their residents on here's the kinds of plantings you need to do. Here's the way you need to put swales in yards. Here's what the city will do. And here's what you as an individual have to do to mitigate this whole contagion that we have here of erosion. And I thought that the task force had a committee, a subcommittee that was working on those communication components. I know I looked at some a year or two ago and gave some comment on back to Carol Holthouse, because I think she was dealing with those. So the more we can get started with getting those kind of communications out, at the same time we move forward with these particular projects, then I think we can get better buy-in from the community as a whole.
Thank you very much. We get Councilmember Rambo, and then I think we'll vote because Yeah, we'll have Councilmember Rambo, Councilmember Marshall, and then I think everybody's spoken at least twice or more. So we'll call it Councilmember Rambo.
This should be really quick. It's an important topic though to kick around in committee. I gave up on the watershed erosion task force, even though it's a subject in just a general subject that's very dear to my heart. But it was clear that rightly or wrongly, fairly or unfairly, Fox Creek watershed was going to be 8th or 9th on the list. And I couldn't help my constituents. And it was just kind of hard to listen to Cox Creek stuff all the time. But my opinion is the Evergreen subdivision area was very well represented on that committee and may or may not continue to be. But the criteria that Teresa and the others so painstakingly developed were already sort of being honored in the breach, and they were going off in a direction of feelings rather than facts. And that's the reason I'm not on that committee. So I think it's critical for us to get those criteria, ensure that they were followed before we vote on appropriating $250,000 or more for these projects. So
Thank you.
Thanks.
Councilmember Marshall.
Mine's not quite as simple, but we keep addressing it. 20 years ago, we said, let's build a park, and then we're going to go to the residents and get a 0.5 cent sales tax that we can use for water runoff and park long-term maintenance. They had that money. You could then do your bonds and you could build that long-term plan. But now with this trash issue, we are not going to get anything past this year. But I really believe that's the answer, is to keep shying away. We got all these people who are affected by it. We got all these residents who love the parks. Now, we know probably half of those people don't even live in the city. But at the same time, we've never been in a situation where, from a communication standpoint, you can do it electronically. I mean, I knocked on doors when we did the 0.5 cent capital improvement tax back in however many years ago that was, but that's $2 million a year now that we can use. We didn't have any of that. So I just think it's one of those things that you can keep saying, how do we get the funding, but long-term funding. And then you could do that. You could go to a subdivision and say, look, we'll get a third from the state, and then you do a community improvement grant in your subdivision, and then you put it together. But we need a revenue stream for both parks and to kind of deal with some of this stuff. And nobody ever wants to put on the ballot. But I tell you, nobody's going to just hand over money, and the residents aren't. But you got to build the case and communicate it. I mean, if you think about how many people live in these watersheds, if those people all came out and voted, you could get your 0.5 cent sales tax or whatever that would be, would make a difference. We never had that in the past. We knocked on every door in the city to get it through, but that's a lot of money. So I just think it's part of a whole bigger plan. Is not, can you do it next year? We just need to lay it out long term, because it's always been a problem. Thanks.
All right. Thank you very much. Well, we've had a good conversation. Thank you, everybody, for your input and your insights. It was definitely a valuable conversation, something that is worth talking about. And so hopefully we'll have a chance to debate it a little further in the council chambers with everybody. So at this point, we've got a motion and a second to approve this to go forward to city council. So with that being said, all in favor of the motion, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? And any abstentions? Okay, thank you very much. It was a worthwhile conversation. All right, that'll move forward. So next on the agenda is the Urban Night Sky designation. Ms. Ripito, an update on next steps.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. I will try to be brief, and I am asking for very little funding. As you may recall, the Department of Planning and Parks was contacted by the International Dark Sky Association regarding potentially certifying a community park as an urban night sky place designation. The department researched the anticipated time and expense related to the urban night sky place, as well as the international dark sky communities at that time, and concluded that although the city comes really close to meeting the dark sky community, the very few steps that we would have to take to get there are actually huge. So we decided to just go with the urban night sky place designation, and at the direction of the committee are pursuing both Bluffview Park and Community Park for the designations. Because it's been a little while since we discussed this, I just wanted to give you a little refresher on what this designation is. It's essentially recognition for public outdoor spaces that are in or adjacent to urban areas that are recognized for their outdoor lighting practices that are considered to be best management practices and can set kind of an example for surrounding communities. These places essentially serve as role models for dark sky protection. So the formal application for this process is approximately 1 to 3 years and requires approval by the IDA's board. Once the city is certified, we will be expected to continue our ongoing public outreach with education and hosting events regarding this so that we can continue to educate our community and even surrounding communities about light pollution and the importance of it. The IDA will provide training for the city and kind of essentially teach personnel how to deliver these messages and events and such. So at any rate, these designations can help foster tourism, local economy, as well as have several other benefits, including, additional savings in taxpayers' pockets, tourism, better health, protects wildlife and such. So now that the department has wrapped up some significant and time-consuming projects like the Route 66 task force and the Wildwood history book, which will be released at Celebrate Wildwood this year. We have come up with a schedule and we are finally taking this on full force. Included in your packet is a schedule, and we anticipate being certified by April of 2025. And during this application process, the city is working on coming up with events, and not even necessarily events, but maybe ways of incorporating our existing events to have an urban night sky component or have educational material at our events. And we do plan on hopefully having a couple events, like maybe a family camp out at Community Park or something like that, and incorporate some kind of stargazing or maybe a quarterly stargazing when something exciting is going on. And there's a lot of organizations that will come out and bring telescopes out for free, set them up. And also the what they consider to be outreach events aren't necessarily events. It's just public outreach. And so it's, things like we've already advertised for Lights Out Heartland this past year. And we're also working on incorporating a children's book from the Dark Sky list into our storybook walk. Because we think, start young. And yeah, so we'll do the normal things as far as informational flyers, and also include those in the new resident packet and all of our online media outreach, and possibly stargazing, telescope events, things like that. But also maybe incorporate things into our Shivering Shadows. Like maybe there's some component that we could add there, or a stargazing event like after a concert or something like that. And reaching out to partners to see if we can also get some assistance with that. So it looks like aside from creating a lighting management plan for these designated parks, there won't be any changes required to the city's regulations. And the initial cost of the application, I think, is $250. It might have gone up, but we will check that. But $250. And the rest of it is all based on our outreach and how much that costs, as far as that's concerned, or any kind of events that we include in there. But most of those, again, will be incorporated into existing events, hopefully. And so aside from that, that essentially concludes the department's presentation. And although this has primarily been just for an update on where we're at with this and that we're finally taking it on, it's been a long time coming. The department is seeking guidance on one component, and that is that we were thinking about including the village green on this application as well. Figure we're in the planning process for that right now. And so it seems like we could, plan our lighting accordingly. And if it meets the requirements, then great. It would just be another park added on to our designations. There's no additional charge for including as many parks as you want to. The Bluffview is pretty easy. Like there's no lighting there, should make it. Community park, we might have to change the lighting in the parking lot perhaps. And so depending on expense, it might not make it. And Village Green, again, with the proximity to town center, don't know. However, any of these can be withdrawn off the application. Like it's not either all or nothing. We can take them off the application and just certify Bluffview if that is the direction that we want to go after we look into this further. But we're thinking about just adding it onto the application for now and see how it works out. And so that is essentially the only thing that we're looking for direction for. And with that really does conclude the department's presentation. But Mr. Vintage and myself are here for any questions you may have.
So you're looking for action from the committee as far as adding Village Green to?
Correct.
Okay. Councilman Rottenberg?
Thank you for that update. You mentioned some great ways, community events, that sort of thing, to get the message out about this dark sky designation. Would we also be looking at including some type of signage, reminding people when they come into the parks that they are designated as dark sky areas?
Yes, I think the International Dark Sky Association actually provides the signage, and I think that we have to have it posted.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Okay. Councilman Marshall?
So then the parks don't close at sunset.
So we did have that discussion when we went through this the first go around, and we do not have to have all of them open all of the time. The Dark Sky Association is fine with us if we just had like like maybe third Saturday of the month or something open for stargazing purposes only and or in a designated area. And Bluffview Park, I think, is open until 10 o'clock right now anyway. So that would qualify as is, but it does not have to be an year-round thing. And Village Green would actually probably be pretty easy to keep an eye on given the proximity to our police station. So yes.
Councilman Clark?
So how far away do you have to have that lighting from the actual area to keep it at night? I mean, I'm like thinking about the lights from the city hall and from the street lights and everything. Is that not going to cause a problem in Village Green?
It's questionable. And that's why I say if we throw it on there and it doesn't make it, then that's a shame. Essentially, we have to come up with a lighting management plan for our parks, for these designated parks that are going to be part of this. And we have to meet that lighting plan, but only within the parks. And so as long as we meet that and, the lights go off a certain time and they're, shaded and various different components to it, then it shouldn't be problematic. Olive at Stacy Park is on Olive and surrounded by and pretty small. And they were certified as an urban night sky place. So I feel like there's hope for it, but we have to do light ratings of the sky and make sure that everything qualifies.
That's one of the 5.
Yes,
Is
Stacy
there
Park.
Is there a reason? I mean, I look at that and go, seems kind of easy to do. Why are there only 5?
So there are actually 6 now. Another one just recently got certified. It's a relatively new designation of theirs. And the purpose of it is, the rest of their designations, you have to be pretty dark in order to qualify. This one is more as an educational outreach component as opposed to, an actual like dark sky community per se. And so it's just utilizing it to help let people know the importance of light pollution.
Councilman Godwin?
I was just going to mention the fact that I liked the idea that you've got community park, which is semi-urban / rural. You've got Bluffview Park, which is much more rural. And then I like the idea of trying city or the whatever we're calling the park here in the middle of town. So that we can gauge the different variations of light that allow for stargazing, that don't impede that possibility, but we also can have our residents look at the night sky in different venues that are quite different from each other. So I'm okay with, let's move forward with this. Do we need a motion? Did we already do a motion on this?
No, we can take a motion.
Okay,
Councilman-
I move that we forward
A
adding.
motion by Councilman Dodwell. Anybody like to second
Village
that
Green?
motion?
Yeah.
Councilman Rambo?
Sure.
Okay.
I also have a question.
He is quick. Okay, so let's take a question.
Yeah, thank you for doing this, Ms. Rifko. The importance of this particular designation is in the education realm, just getting people used to the idea that, yeah, I can have better lighting, and the migratory birds and the nocturnal animals and such, those are the beneficiaries of this. Ms. Clark is exactly right. The Village Green is not going to be dark enough for any useful stargazing of first magnitude stars and planets, and big things like eclipses are really about all you can see with Deerbergs and the other stuff shining. But sadly, very sadly, as I've said, Starlink is an abomination, and pretty soon all we'll see is the Starlink grid up there. But we are supposedly pretty good already with our night sky compliant lighting requirements for new construction. And so sort of this allows us to evangelize for that as well. And I think for that reason alone, it's a great idea to try to include the Village Green, because maybe we can get us, maybe they'll give us a sign, even if we're not quite even if there's inside, even if there aren't any things you can actually astronomical phenomenon you can see from.
We'll just make our own sign.
At least, yeah, maybe we'll make our own sign, and
Right.
yeah. So
We tried.
Yeah,
anyway, thank you very much for that. I'm happy to support it, and it's cheap. So
awesome. Okay, well, we've got that. Great discussion on the matter. Let's take the vote on that. So all in favor of this motion, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? All right, motion carries. Thank you. Mr. Vunich on the town center area development summary that we talked about in council.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair and members of the committee, as you'll recall from our last city council meeting, there was a bit of confusion about how the information's being portrayed and how best to portray that information, so there might be a better ease of understanding and then lead to a more productive discussion. Tonight, the department is providing to you what we have come up with as an original thought in terms of an executive summary. It was intended to be one page only and convey the pertinent facts that may change between project to project, but in this particular case, we used the one that was the subject of the discussion at the aforementioned meeting. It shows basically the designation from our master plan, the regulating plan designation, the current zoning, proposed zoning, requested use, density, allowable density, parking ratio, which always seems to be a key component, and then finally any commentary that might be worthwhile in this particular case, the 2-car garage versus 1-car. And then concluding it would be just an aerial photograph that shows the subject site highlighted, and then the surrounding roadway system and development pattern. And so this was the thought. Certainly, it's the first thought, and I suspect that there may be improvements that certainly could come. I'd like to think there is. And then the second item is the cheat sheet, the Cliff Notes of Town Center. And so we've kind of put together this 11 by 17 sheet. It contains all the regulating plan land use designations, along with building types like criteria, building standards, facade standards, and site standards. And certainly we'll place this on the website if it's acceptable to the committee. But it's a great way to basically find out about everything in one place. So tonight, we're wondering what you think.
Okay, well, we'll start out. Do you need a motion to do anything with this? Send
Yes,
it
I'd
back
like to
council?
proceed forward with this to the city council and get some type of level of endorsement tonight.
Somebody like to make that motion?
I'll make that.
Councilmember Marshall, seconded by Councilmember Dodwell. Any discussion on the matter? Councilmember Marshall.
I think it's great, but
Mhm.
the suggestion I would have, how's that? A great but is whenever you put it out with that particular development, only put the column that's allowed. Don't give them 6 other categories of zoning. That's not even gonna, because they're all gonna start asking questions. Well, why can't we do this? Or why can't they do that? Where if you keep it really focused, this is what currently is approved. So, whether either just highlight the one bar down, but this is what you're talking about. If it's general neighborhood, this is it, not 7 other categories that they say, well, what can they do this? No, this is what the plan would call for. So I just think it's really interesting. Done a lot of different ways, but I kind of think if you make it so simple that it really focuses the discussion and the development on these are the things that can be done in that zoning category, and take away all the ones that, why can't I have that? And see if that would make it a little simpler. Just my thoughts. Thanks.
Councilmember Clark?
Yeah, and sorry for this, Joe, but under density, the first density, I would have either a slash or the word per, not both of them.
Okay, thank you.
And I don't know, I was just looking at this and thinking that maybe if you put it on the instead of the portrait, the landscape, the comment section would be easier to read it. I don't know if that fits with your putting the subject side on there or not, but that's just an idea. And on the land use, at the bottom, it has an asterisk on conditional use permit required to modify. And it's only on a few of these, but aren't most of these, wouldn't you need a conditional use to modify?
For the most part, most town center projects are done under a site-specific ordinance, a PRD, a C8, et cetera. In this instance, this was something that came out of the town center update team. For example, in the downtown district, we have the project that Mr. Cohen's proposed to accommodate the apartments as part of the downtown district. It needed a conditional use permit. And so there was just a limited number that the town center update team wanted to accommodate, let's say, a little more latitude, because again, the downtown district prior to the update was just all commercial. And so, yes, it's intentional that there's just a few, but there were a few because they give greater latitude to something that already has, for the most part, a lot of latitude associated with it already.
What about attaching, it would be helpful for me if there was a map attached with a different land use color coded.
That's entirely doable. The town center regulating plan map, which does include the street network, the boundary, et cetera, can be the second side of basically a single page, two-sided. And we can easily put that on the website as well.
Okay, Councilmember Dodwell.
I was going to mention the same thing, but these land use classifications, the full one that you have, I think it'd be great if you could have that plus the mapping posted up on the website so that as developers are looking at locations around here, they can get a sense. And the residents can also look at it too and say, okay, what can happen next door to me or down the street from me in general terms, and maybe put some kind of disclaimer on it that just says, these are our standards. Individual projects may differ slightly or something along those lines. You can talk to John Young about how to word that. Does that make sense?
Very much so. I like the disclaimer a lot because I don't want someone just to assume that it's on the table. It can. Yep. So
They can.
Yep.
Okay. All right. Well, we've got a motion and a second. Oh, sorry, Councilmember Bartoni. My bad.
No problem. Thank you, Joe. I like this also, and I agree with a couple of the other comments. Mr. Marshall kind of just, erase some of the noise on a certain development, and a map would be helpful. But my question, Joe, is would your intention be, and the department's intention be, to present this with any development? There's a development over at Ridge Road, down on Wild Horse Creek, or wherever, and to just include this with any proposal that's come into planning and zoning and the council and anything that's going to get residents' attention.
Yes, unless the committee would direct otherwise, I would intend to do the executive summary with any project that comes out of Planning and Zoning Commission. And quite frankly, any plat that's presented to you as part of a council agenda. So yes, the summary would follow almost anything, and hopefully as we use it more, it gets better in terms of the things that are helpful and things that maybe aren't as helpful. It'd be a document that could be altered as we learn more.
Yeah, well, great job to you and your team for putting this together. And this is going to help not just residents, but I think I will admit that it will help me on council because I don't know all these check marks myself.
Awesome. Well, thank you for that feedback, and thank you, Joe, for answering everybody's questions. So with that being said, we've got the motion on the floor that's been seconded. So let's go ahead and take a vote on that motion. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? And any abstentions? Motion carries. Thank you very much. And then the final deal under planning matters is just a department notification, which does anybody have any questions regarding that? Okay. Oh, Councilmember Clark.
Mr. Bunich, again, under the market, the reserves, it mentions that to the same apply as for Ashley Grove about grandfathering, and I know that term is not favorable all the time, but so are you saying that the reserves and Ashley Grove will still be on the previous tree preservation plan and everything else will be on the new one?
Yes, the action of City Council at its last meeting, for the most part, said that the site-specific ordinance and the requirements for these two relative to tree stand delineation, tree preservation plan, and then anything relating to the landscape manual would apply as presented, not necessarily under the newest regulations. But be aware that in the case of the reserve, particularly the reserve, we spent a great deal of time embellishing and improving those specific conditions in the site-specific ordinance to achieve a better product in terms of the tree preservation components.
Thank you. I was just asking if those are the only two.
It's a approximately 6+ acre site. For all intents and purposes, the pond is pretty much the land use feature. There are some trees around Mr. Schnuppler's house. For all intents and purposes, the accommodation is authorized for the reserve, but more importantly, I think the support out of the commission was premised on the fact that we spent so much time improving that, and we gave ourselves some latitude as we move forward through the site development plan process to even do more.
Okay. All right, we're good there. So that takes us then to park matters. We have two items under old business. The first being Celebrate Wildwood event revenues and expenditures. Director Vunich.
Thank you again, Mr. Chair. And this, for all intents and purposes, is just an update, and I'll do it very briefly. As you know, the Celebrate Wildwood event is in approximately 2 months. As part of the 2022 budget discussions for fiscal year 2023, there is a desire to reduce the expenditure level the city accommodates for this event while raising revenues. I think we're doing pretty well. I hope you agree. Right now, our sponsorships are above what we had last year, well above what we had last year at this time. And the vendor fees that the Wildwood Celebration Commission imposed are doing well at raising funds additionally. So from the perspective of the department, I think we're doing pretty well. We're almost up to $20,000. Our goal is $30,000. We sent out, we're sending out this week letters of sponsorship to all of our consultants and contractors, those that benefit with their relationships with the city. I expect, I hope you do as well, some reciprocity of this. And then we're also sending the information out to the subdivisions to see if they'd like to sponsor the event and be part of the parade and et cetera. So just an update. I hope you find it informative. And as I say, I think we're doing pretty well. By this time next month, hopefully I'll even have a better report for you in terms of reaching our goal. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that update. On to the next item, bid results for the relocation of Anniversary Park swing set to Glencoe City Park. Director Vunich.
Yes, again, thank you, Mr. Chair. Members of the committee, as you know, we replaced the swing set in Anniversary Park with one that was designed to provide shade at all times. With that replacement, the old swing set, which was still functional, became available. And we looked at potential locations for it, and we ended up considering Glencoe City Park. The park designer, TerraSpec, conducted a bid process. Bid process included the map that is before you, the plan sheet, as well as specifications. 3 bids were submitted. The low bid was $31,000, which was more than anticipated. And so tonight, the department has given you 3 options. Would you like to proceed forward and endorse the bid from Fry, which was the low bid? Or if you would not prefer that, to not proceed. And then if you do prefer to proceed, we would like then authorization to present this to City Council. Again, the bid was more than anticipated. The estimate that was provided through our discussions with the park designer were somewhere around $24,000 to $25,000. The flat work, the installations, et cetera. So it's a little unfortunate, but it's not unusual what we're seeing in the bidding environment right now.
Director Vunich, real quick, I've got a question. What do we know? Number one, the condition of the swing that's being relocated, and how old is it? And then what would be the cost of just putting in a new swing set versus relocating the old one?
The swing set that was removed from Anniversary Park was the original. The frame itself had not been changed, but over the years we had replaced all the chains and the swings themselves. We had updated them on multiple occasions just to keep them functional and safe. So I can't remember the last time we did that, but it was probably within the last 2 to 3 years. All in all, it's still a very functional and safe swing set. That's why we just didn't want to recycle it, so to speak. Submit the swing set frame just to be recycled.
What exactly are they doing for $32,000 to install it?
They're going to basically create the pad for the swings, which entails some grading work, some rock, some special mulch for the fall. They're going to basically create a concrete gutter or around the perimeter for the safety zone. And then that pink area is the flat work associated with it. As I say, the bid was more than anticipated.
Councilman Rottenberg?
What is the downside of us not relocating the swing set?
We'll store the swing set as is and look for other opportunities. I don't see a downside. Like I said, it just was more of a bid than I expected. Bid amount, pardon me.
Okay.
Anybody else?
I assume those days are over when you had a swing set and bare dirt that filled up with water when it was raining, and that was it. And you could do it for $1,000 if you paid somebody to do the labor. We can't do anything simpler.
No, because again, we wanted to address drainage, which is a component of the rock. We also want to create a safe fall surface. That's standard practice and required. And then you have to protect the zone, let people know where they can't walk.
So I guess my real less flippant question is, this was the only place that we could find, and it requires this extra work for the drainage, and there's no cheaper, simpler place to locate this swing set, even if it's off the beaten path a little bit more.
Well, we chose Glencoe City Park, and hopefully it was explained to you as the
It was.
That this is an area where we have just a whole lot of people visit almost every day of the week. And the current facilities at Glencoe City Park, there's a crowd. And so we thought by adding it here, we could address some of that crowd situation and improve the property as well. $31,000 is a lot of money. I don't want to necessarily say the department isn't supporting it, but it's not the bid price that I was hoping for.
What are the options? You mentioned that you could store it for a later time. What would be the option of potentially storing it and putting it in Village Green somewhere when that's being built already?
That's certainly an option. There's multiple options as we move forward. As you know, with Village Green, we're looking at a $2 million price tag now for phase one. So it will be a while before we actually bring in the playground equipment. So we may be able to do something there in the future. More on a timely basis.
So we've got all this property. I wasn't quite finished, but we've got all this property in Glencoe City Park. And there's no place that doesn't have a drainage issue that we could do it for the 20,000 that you mentioned.
We selected this because it's out of the floodplain.
Okay. But does it need to be if it's a swing
Certainly
set?
not. We have all of our shelters out the Alt Foster Memorial Trailhead go underwater. They were designed for that. We certainly designed this for it. But like I say, it's a lot for installing a equipment we already have.
Yeah.
I guess I am saying I don't support the bid, quite frankly.
But would you at 20?
If it were in that $20,000 to $24,000 range, I think it'd be a reasonable approach and certainly something that would be easier to adjust the current budgets or other projects the department have in capital improvements.
Councilmember Ottmer.
I guess based on the conversation we've had so far, I'm not sure if I'm going to phrase this properly, but I would make a motion that we delay indefinitely consideration of this relocation of this swing set.
Okay, we've got a motion to delay. Anybody like to second that motion?
I'm fine with it.
All right, we've got a second. Any discussion on the motion?
It's only gonna cost more.
To Councilmember Rambo's point, you've got it outside the floodplain. If you were to potentially have it rebid in that same Glencoe Park in the floodplain, where they wouldn't potentially have to put that drainage in because it's in the floodplain anyway, would that knock off some considerable cost?
Actually, the rock part would probably be one of the least expensive. That's some of the less expensive material, but certainly I can investigate it. And the motion to deny this particular proposal wouldn't necessarily negate us doing a further investigation elsewhere at Glencoe City Park or somewhere, another park location the city has.
So we can do that with that direction to you and just go ahead and vote on this motion.
So if we vote on this motion, then to delay this
Then
indefinitely, you
we'll-
can continue to investigate and maybe have Fry and the other one, Burn was really high, but the other two can maybe tell them anywhere else in the park that they could relocate it to where it could be considerably cheaper or the best scenario. So, all right, well, great. Let's take a vote on the motion. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? And any abstentions? Okay. Motion carried.
Can we get those details before we get into budget discussions? Thank you.
Bid process allows us to basically go back to the low bidder and say, here's the things we can't do. Are you willing to basically do components of it? And so that's what I'll do. And we'll try to figure out a better location at a substantially least cost option. We'll come back to you as soon as we have that information. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much. Councilmember Clark.
When we come up with something like this and we have an item that we're trying to find a place to put it, we're trying to do something with it. Is there anything like county-wide that the cities get together and they say, I've got a swing set, but I really need something else. Can I switch with you at a different city? Is there anything going on like that?
Ms. Clark, Kristen Nager, our park superintendent, she has conversations all the time about different things that are going on in other municipalities, park systems, problems they're having, opportunities they found, and certainly at times regulations that are being applied. I do not know if there is a kind of a barter system out there between equipment, but I can certainly ask her and respond to you all in email.
Thank you. All right. With that being said, that under new business, the Gateway Off-Road Cyclist, obviously, we've already addressed that. And that leaves us with the 2 department notifications. Does anybody have any questions or comments related to anything in there?
I apologize, just in terms of the last agenda item relative to expenditures and revenues, as you can see, we set a record last month at $92,000 between the 2 park contractors. I do want to give you a couple of footnotes associated with that. In discussions with the account clerk, Justina, we captured the end of April and the start of June as part of that billing cycle. So it was not just a single month per se. It wasn't all 3 months, but it was parts of the end of April and the beginning of June. Secondly, there were 2 things that caused the amount to increase substantially. One was the repair of the Rock Hollow Trail. We had that blowout that brought the edge of basically the trail to the creek. And then we had the problem under the bridge. Key Hill, that was about $11,000. Then we also, unfortunately, had the plumbing contractor out to Community Park 3 times due to the grinder pumps being clogged by things people put in the toilet. And we put signage inside there. We begged them not to do it. We have receptacles in there, but inevitably, John, the plumber that works for Wadbringer, tells us it's stuff that people are just dropping in the toilets that they have to face. So that was 3 of those. That was about, I believe, around $7,000. So for the 3 visits. So there were some extenuating circumstances. To you as the committee, Ms. Nager, our park superintendent, and I are going through a process. We're going to address this lawn mowing, this maintenance cost now. And what we're doing is we're looking at the cycle they're on and we're extending those cycles. So if you get complaints about the height of grass in some of the parks, please let us know. We can certainly adjust. We're looking at extending those periods between certain cuttings for less used properties to a greater extent. And then obviously, like in Community Park by the playground area, we're going to continue to cut that on a weekly basis. That's our pride and joy, and people are there. But we've got to do something to get the turf costs down until this coming year with our bids of maintenance contract. We're going to separate out lawn maintenance. And under state statute and our local code, that's not a union wage that has to be paid. And that's what we're doing right now. So
Okay.
we're working on it. My apologies. I just want to keep you abreast. We're doing our best we can. But switching from Mr. Gailey to the 2 contractors we have has really been a learning experience and not one I probably would want to do again. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And that brings us then to our final item on the agenda for the evening. And that is an executive session. So we'll need to get a motion and a second to go into executive session. Councilmember Rambo makes the motion, Councilmember Clark second, and we'll have to do a roll call vote to go into executive session. So Ms. Ripito, if you would do roll call.
Councilmember Clark,
Yes.
Councilmember Ottenberg,
Yes.
Councilmember Marshall,
Yes.
Chair Galani,
Yes.
Councilmember Rambo,
Yes.
Councilmember Dodville.
Yeah.
And Councilmember Bartoni.
Yes.
All right, we are back on.
Does anybody have any, do you have anything to say, Joe?
Mr. Chair, members of the committee, at the next meeting, with your permission, I'm going to bring a few of those not ready for action items up for consideration and removal from the agenda. Some of them are years old and they're no longer applicable. We've either addressed them or the issue has been resolved. And so I'd like to clean up the agenda and make it a little less like we're not doing things that we should appearance. And then the only other thing I have real quickly is we have concert Friday night, 6:45 p.m. It's Dr. Chevegas, which is always a lot of fun. So if you have time,
Yeah.
please come by.
Thank you so much, Director Vunich. Okay, any questions by anybody on any of those matters? Okay. That brings us to other matters, which will be the next meeting, which is scheduled for Tuesday, August 15th, 2023. And then that brings us to adjournment. Does anybody have anything? There's not miscellaneous, but does anybody have anything they want to say? All right, good. That brings us to adjournment. Would someone like to make a motion to adjourn? Councilmember Dodwell, second by Councilmember Ratmo. All in favor of the motion, please say aye.
Aye.
And opposed? And any abstentions? Thank you very much for a great meeting, everybody. And thank you for the department for all the valuable information, and the discussion from everybody was really good too. So have a great rest of the month, and we'll see you next month.